One of the most remarkable things about Horace as a poet is the way he could function under Augustus as a court poet, singing the praises of the emperor and what have you, and yet still criticize in a way that is arguably not criticizing. He knows how to play both sides of the fence. He has that canny politician's sensibility where he doesn't you can't nail him down on any one position very often, and he seems to be saying one thing, but at the same time he's saying something very different, and you have to be very uh, awake to that possibility whenever he starts writing. And we see this in one of the odes, Nunc est bibendum. Now we must drink, now we must beat the earth with unfettered feet. Now, my friends, is the time to load the couches of the gods with Salian feasts. Before this, it was a sin to take the concubine down from its ancient racks, while the mad queen, from her contaminated flock of men diseased by vice, was preparing the ruin of the capital and the destruction of our power. Crazed with hope, unlimited, and drunk with sweet misfortune, but her madness decreased when scarce a ship escaped the flames of, and her mind, defanged by neurotic wine, was made to face real fears as she flew from Italy, and Caesar pressed on the oars like a hawk after gentle doves, or a swift hunter after the hare on the snowy plains of Thrace, to put in chains this monster sent by fate. But she looked for a nobler death. She did not have a woman's fear of the sword, nor did she make for secret shores with her swift feet, daring to gaze with face serene upon her ruined palace, and brave enough to take deadly serpents in her hand and let her body drink the black poison. Fiercer she was in the death she chose, as though she did not wish to cease to be a queen, taken to Rome on the galleys of savage Liburnians, to be a humble woman in a proud triumph. Well, she is Cleopatra at this moment. This is the story of Octavian, the soon-to-be Augustus, defeating Mark Antony and Cleopatra and the forces of the Orient, as it will, and the collapse of the triumvirate and his ascension to sole power, Augustus's ascension to sole power, and declaration of the empire. And this is a fairly standard tribute to a military victory, saying, and now we have conquered, we have dominion over those wild people out there in Egypt. And for those purposes, Cleopatra makes a good foil, and you see her again and again in literature and art of the time, being very much this exotic temptress from the East who is there to sway the noble Roman heart from his duty. And obviously, this is connected to Dido in the Aeneid from Horace's contemporary Virgil. But she functions as a kind of convenient villain in this, and you can see this. The way she is characterized, the Mad Queen, contaminating a flock of men, diseased by vice. She was crazed, but her madness decreased. The mad, hysterical woman. Honestly, this is emotionalism. This is all the stuff that women are supposed to be such victims of. They're not steady, sober Roman men. He is playing on a very simple sexism here, and he's relying to a degree on that uh, as a mechanism for his audience, because he knows that his audience is going to be mostly men, mostly Roman men, and so by beating up on the common other, the women and the Egyptians, He knows how to make it seem like, yeah, I'm on your side. Yeah, we're just guys. We're regular Roman guys. And, those women are crazy. So he's playing on that to get them to sort of like, sidle up to him and say, all right, yeah, this is one of us. But look what the poem is actually doing. It is not that laudatory of the Roman man at all. It starts, now we must drink. Nunc est bibendum, drinking. Uh, the the portrait of the Roman is usually kind of split on this because they really admire simple, cold, reasonable, clarity, not inebriation, not irrationality that comes from drinking. And yet at the same time, they also have that culture where, seize the day. Horace's most famous most famous quotation, where he's celebrating. And this is the culture that gives us vomitoriums, so that when you eat and drink too much, you can go into a special room in your house, throw it all up, and go back and start again. So there is this sort of split character running through the Roman mind. But here he is very much starting with the "it's time to party" phase. And that is immediately set off against um, all of the evils of Egypt, all of the corruption of and lasciviousness and luxury of Egypt, with the mad queen and the flock of men diseased by vice. Vice, well, I think laying around drinking all the time could be called a vice. And so this is sort of a awkward position for him to be taking in, but he's doing it very deliberately in those first two stanzas to contrast the two cultures. And, well, okay, that's interesting. And then it goes on, and it talks about how she won, or she, Cleopatra and the Egyptians lost this battle, and she had to retreat. And the images that they use for this is somewhat brutal. And Caesar pressed on the oars, and he chased after her like a hawk after gentle doves. Now, I don't know that much about birds, but I'm guessing gentle doves is really anchoring that sense that, well, doves are pretty and doves are sweet, and, well, hawks, those are like serious predators. And I think hawks, I think of the wingspan, and I think of the claws, the talons, the ability to hunt. You can go back and forth on whether or not that's an admirable quality, but still, there's something quite disturbing in that image of the hawk and the gentle doves. There's something quite vicious about that. Or the swift hunter after a hare on the snowy plains of Thrace. The snowy plains. Okay, all right, fine. Hunting, fine, normal, whatever. But snowy plains, why does there have to be snow? There's only snow on Thrace, which is north of Greece, every now and then, a couple times a year. Why does he choose to have it snowy? Well, as an image, when you hunt in snow, you see the blood more. It's less pretty, perhaps. Well, snow always makes things prettier, but you can't turn away from the violence of it. The blood is much more obvious. So those two images are disturbing. They're brutal. They're very violent. And the Romans are the instigators of the violence in those images. The Roman Caesar here is the hawk. Caesar being essentially metonymy, if you will, for the entire Roman forces. Caesar here meaning Augustus as well. It's putting the Romans in the disturbing position of being vicious and cruel and somewhat even sadistic, you get the sense. Gentle doves, snowy plains. They're really leaning on that innocence, that that quality of vulnerability also. That, why are we beating up on them? Why are we hunting them down? Why are we treating them like animals? And then the poem goes a little bit further. And having established that, Cleopatra is the mad queen and she is crazed, drunk with sweet fortune, madness, really drilling down on that hysterical female quality. Look what happens at the end. Daring to gaze with face serene upon her ruined palace, and brave enough to take her deadly servants in her hand and let her body drink their black poison. Fiercer she was in the death she chose, as though she did not wish to cease to be a queen, taken to Rome on the galleys of savage Liburnians, to be a humble woman in a proud triumph. She's not mad here. She's not hysterical. She is quite serene and brave. She is daring. She did not have a woman's fear in the earlier stanza. She looked for a nobler death. She looked noble, not afraid, daring, brave. They're talking about the suicide of Cleopatra. She supposedly had herself bitten by an asp rather than be defeated. When she knew that she was defeated, she killed herself, essentially. But she faces it with such courage in this portrait. Now, this is a story coming to us from ancient history, and it's loaded over with all sorts of politics. So I'm not going to believe any historical account and say that, well, this is exactly what happens. But this is a remarkable portrait from a Roman of the time to be saying that, well, yeah, she had real dignity. She accepted her fate and did what she felt was right. She didn't shirk from it. She didn't get hysterical. She didn't lash out. She didn't just, go back and drink herself to death. She did something very sober, very deliberate, very in her calculation, reasonable. And that last line, to be a humble woman in a proud triumph. That's the Roman ideal as they describe it. Humility is a well, not necessarily humility, but a sense of understatement. You don't brag. You're not showy. These are characteristics of a Roman ideal, where you let your actions do the talking. A proud triumph says enough. You don't boast on top of that. And the contrast here is remarkable because she is living that ideal of clear-eyed, sober courage and acceptance of fate, even when it doesn't go your way. And when you reach the end of a poem, you always have to go back and look at the beginning again. And where are these two people? Where are these two nations? Well, the Romans are getting drunk. The Romans are clouding their vision. They are boasting in their triumph. And they are probably being kind of loud and obnoxious. She is not. So whereas the poem begins like, you know, a stadium full of fans singing, "We will rock you, we are the champions," it ends in a very different way. Now, maybe he was banking on, well, Augustus, he doesn't have that long of a, he can't focus on anything for too long. He'll listen to the first few lines and then his mind will go elsewhere, and I can go anywhere with the poem from there. But you can see that remarkable trajectory where if anybody were to accuse Horace of, well, what are you talking about? What are you talking about that crazy woman for? And making her sound so good. All he has to do is point at the beginning and say, well, no, I'm with you guys. But it's how it ends that gives it its power, that reveals the other side to that portrait. Because no history, especially political and military history, no history is complete. You have to turn it around and look at the different sides of it and the different perspectives, because everybody's going to have a different idea of what really happened. And people, for the defeated, for the conquered, the vision, perspective is vastly different. History tends to be written by the winners, as they say, by the conquerors. But from that other perspective, it's different. And maybe Horace is here suggesting that, well, maybe we can learn something from those people, from the conquered. Maybe they are living our ideals better than we are. Maybe we would be stronger if we considered what they were going through, what they were talking about, what they were thinking, what they did. Because by always just celebrating our own invincibility, we are setting ourselves up for a fall. I don't know that this is what he was saying. It looks to me like that's what is in here. You can see in here the drama of the decline and fall of Rome, where the corruption of later emperors and the drinking and the irrational behavior is sort of embedded in this. And the self-congratulation for ruling the planet slowly gets eclipsed by leaner, fiercer, more cold-eyed opponents. That's what I see Horace peering into the future and warning is coming.